G'day everyone, this is Tom Lee, your Quantum Odyssey tour guide, and today is a very special day, especially if you're American. Today is the Juneteenth of 2025, and Juneteenth is only very recently a federal holiday at the United States. The history of Juneteenth goes back to over 150 years ago, concerning the enslavement of Black Americans and the events of Freedom's Eve, on the eve of January the 1st of 1863. So on that night, enslaved and free African Americans gathered in churches and private homes all across the country awaiting news that the Emancipation Proclamation had taken effect. This Emancipation Proclamation declared that all enslaved people in the Confederate States were declared legally free. And only through the 13th Amendment did emancipation end slavery throughout the United States. Juneteenth is seen as the United States' second Independence Day. Unfortunately, not everyone in Confederate territory would immediately be free. So even if the Emancipation Proclamation was made effective in 1863, it could not be implemented in many places. For example, Texas, which freedom only came 2 years after, on the 19th of June, which 2,000 troops arrived in Galveston Bay, Texas. And they've announced that 250,000 enslaved Black people in that largest of the contiguous states were freed by executive decree. So Juneteenth is deeply tied to not just America, but specifically Texas. This publisher is this engraving by the Declaration of Juneteenth. Then, after emancipation, there is Reconstruction, which lasted 11 years, marking an era of great hope, but also with uncertainty and struggle for this nation as a whole. So, formerly enslaved people immediately sought to reunify families, establish schools, and even sue slaveholders for compensation. So, over 200 years of enslavement. Such changes were nothing short for just phenomenal. Juneteenth is now our country's second Independence Day de facto. Although it is long been celebrated in the African American community, since 2020s, has been officially promoted to a federal holiday in the United States, where stock markets and government services are closed. This day is a great opportunity for me to live stream a doubleheader on Quantum Odyssey to fill in the slots which were not taken by the wiser Romanian sessions. This is going to be a dinky die experience, and I hope you enjoy this live stream, this once in a year live stream, or once in a lifetime, given that it's 2025, the International Year of Quantum Technology and Sciences. So, on this blackboard, we have a set of gates. These gates, you might be also familiar, as well as the poly gates, which are the X, Y, Z, and H. The gates I have listed there are variants of the poly gate, which only differ by an imaginary or negative constant. So the red X over there is the neg X gate. That can be constructed using X and Z. The yellow pair of wires running straight, that's called diagonal in matrix terms, is neg I, big I, little I for imaginary unit, big I for the identity gate. or identity matrix. So it will look like this diagonal neg I, neg I. This crisscross looks just like a Y gate, but it's easily confused because the forward crisscross, that means from the left to the right, is yellow rather than green. This is called a neg Y gate, and it has a matrix representation as this. So 0 from 1 will be this slot. 0 from 1 would be I. 1 from 0 will be neg I. This gate looks like an H gate, but it's actually XH. Because the variants of the H gate only differ by whether the gate has 1 or 3 red wires and which wire is differently colored. That has applications in superdense coding and quantum teleportation. The matrix representation of this gate would be 1 over root 2, then, okay, 0 from 0, 1, 0 from 1, minus 1. 1 from 0, 1, and 1 from 1, 1. And this is literally XH through matrix multiplication, which is just a form of function composition. So the gate after that is called the SX gate. So SX is by definition just called root X. The gate representation is slightly more complicated, but it is of the form a half, then the diagonals are 1 plus I, the anti-diagonals are 1 minus I. The last two gates are the gates which enable a phenomenon called non-Clifford, which allows universal 1-qubit computation. The simplest example is called the T gate. The T gate is defined as the square root of x. So, square root of x. Square root of s, so it has a representation of 1, and then we have the diagonal. Which this diagonal would be 1 plus I over root 2. So that last gate there is just a generalization, which is called the phase shift gate. So P of theta will be another diagonal gate, so that means the wires are all straight. 1 e to the I theta. One thing important about this is the topic for today's topic will be the Clifford gates. So Clifford group. The Clifford group will be a central topic for the main path of ring 2 and onwards. The Clifford group are the gates that are generated by the poly gates X, Y, Z, the H gate, and the C gate. The T gate and the P gate are not Clifford. They break Clifford. and allows the implementation of more difficult gates, such as the P of theta gate, and then possibly any unitary when you're dealing with multi-gate qubits. We will start our live stream. So right now, so we have descend. So this is the Clifford Group. So in earlier lessons, we acquainted ourselves with the foundational polygates, X, Y, and Z, the quintessential building blocks of the quantum toolkit. Let's venture into the realm of intriguing gates. Again, intriguing gates, not the very simple ones like X, Y, Z, or even H, or even SX. SX is considered nothing more than HSH. We visualize this in terms of Pauli and the T gate, and the H gates, and C gates as well. The Cliffords emerge as a practical architects of quantum transformations, and moreover, if you only use Clifford gates, that means the quantum gate is an easy gate. It's easily simulated by classical, so it gives us like no real benefit. If you want to do real quantum computing, you have to break out of the Clifford Group, or let's say the easy stuff. You have to do the hard stuff now. So let's start our live stream. And I have also used OBS to write down my notes if necessary. So let's go. It's 7 o'clock now. Okay, in this first example, we have the answer, it's ZXZ. So ZXZ, so we want the gate, the sigil from the blue sigil to 0 to a red sigil in the 1 slot. So ZXZ. ZXZ is actually equivalent to the neg X gate. So we just remove the phase to continue. So we now have to sandwich the Y gate with the Z gate. So ZYZ. This is equivalent to the neg Y gate. Notice how similar the neg Y gate looks to the actual Y gate. But the difference is the green path is backwards from the right to the left. Okay, we can then remove the phase using another S. So okay, now we will deal with the mechanism which switches from the Z basis to the Y basis. So X between S dagger and S. So what happens? The S gate, however, is not its own direct inverse. The inverse of a general phase gate is just a conjugate of that. This is the Y gate. Now we want to validate that this thing is indeed the Y gate. So number 5, so we have this. S inverse, which is S dagger because it's unitary, X S equals Y. So basically changes an X into a Y. So Y and Y. Okay. Now we are going to identify the other role of the H gate. The H gate is not just a splitter or joiner on one, but it's also a basis transformation machine. So it allows you to implement X without using X. It allows you to use X with Z and then Z with X. So sandwich the X's with the H's. Then you will turn this into a Z. Notice that for sigil on the left, it's unaffected. But now we will deal with a sigil on the right, which we will switch place. On the other hand, the H gate can be used to express X in terms of Z. So this gate over there, H, turns the 0 state into the plus state. And then the Z in the middle turns it into the minus state, which is just simply the negative eigenvector, or the one state in the X basis. And then the other H, which is just reconverts it back into the Z basis, the default basis. Now we will look over the C gate. Okay. The controlled gate is also a Clifford gate. The reason is, let's try placing an X gate between the two C axes. So notice the 2 qubits has been flipped from 0, 0 to 1, 1. So effectively switching the 2 X gates is the one that's being affected. On qubit 1, another to qubit 2. So we apply an H. This creates entanglement, so no, X. So we have CX, then X on the control, then CX again. The result, the actual result is the 2 X gates in parallel. So this is the overall result. So we have this 0, 0 to 1, 1, 0, 1 to 1, 0, 1, 0 to 0, 1, 1, 1 to 0, 0. This is equivalent to the double X gate in parallel. So double X, that's verifies it because double X is also its own inverse. The Clifford gates are very important because these are the building blocks of all the simple elementary gates. They form a small group, so anything that involves only Clifford transformations can only yield other Clifford transformations. The narrow set of easy quantum transformations, unitary transformations. They're not powerful on their own. So one aspect of group is called closure. So these are the axioms of group theory. So just to express this in the simplest language. So axioms of group theory. Now I'm going to use the whiteboard. So, axioms of group theory. So, group is just a mathematical formulation of a configuration, action, or symmetry. The first one is associative. That means if you have a sequence of 3 or more, the order you do that pairwise does not matter. So A, B, C is equal to A of B, C. Closure. Closure is where the topic of Clifford into Clifford is. So for all A, B, and G, all A in G for all B in G, AB is in G. We have inverse and identity. So these are the main formulation of group theory. So about that, I epic failed. So the text is too much. So okay. Important examples of non-Clifford gates are the rotating qubits around different measurement bases. So this seems like you are applying a phase gate or a T gate. However, there's also a rotation around like other bases. For example, rotation around the X basis or around the Y basis. And this topic will also understand how to express these gates in terms of the phase shift gate. So let's try what the controlled X does. So let's produce a rotation gate between the two C0s. So in this case, it's RT, the RT gate. It looks like an H gate, but it splits in the ratio of 2 to 1. So this transforms our simple single qubit rotation into a much more powerful 2-qubit gate. So it's not just equivalent to performing the same rotation independently on both, but it's able to generate entangled states. Let's try what happens if we put it on the other side. So that would just mean you're applying RT on the 0th qubit. But because there is a control operator that sandwiches between the next, the RT, the effect is an unequal entanglement. Here is another example. So given this resulting custom gate, you want to produce an unequal superposition, one of the 4 variations of the Bell gate. So it's an unequal version of a Bell gate. So first, let's try performing a double X. And it doesn't even matter if you can do it on the other side as well. But so all 4 uneven Bell states. Which are the maximally entangled canonical entangled pair. Now this diagram looks like a transformation around the Y basis. So we have Sx and its inverse X S dagger. So we can produce an unequal H, so RT, and then the right sigil becomes yellow. So this is an RT on the Y basis. This is the powerful new 3-qubit gate you will obtain. No, it's 2-qubit. It can also create a variation of the Bell state, except this time the phases differ by a quarter turn. So this one, let's apply an Z. A Z and then an X. This one will introduce you to your other non-Clifford gate called the T gate. The T gate is a fourth root of the Z gate, or the square root of the X gate. And I mean the principal one, the positive root. By attaching H's on both sides, we have a quarter turn around the X-axis. And it looks more intimidating. So the smaller component, the imaginary component, is 0.35, which eventually should be a familiar number, but not the 0.85 or the 0.15. This shows the hidden depth of using the T gate. The T gate breaks Cliffordness. Okay. Wrap your outcome with the previous puzzle with the H gate. So let's apply an H again on the outside, and then you will get an X. So the unknown gate is the T gate of the X basis. And then we return this back into the Z basis, and because the qubit is in the 0 state, it's unaffected by the T gate. So the next puzzle we will discuss is called the square root of X. So now we have two branches. The first one is a challenge electron outside of ring 2, and the second one is a main electron on ring 2. The square root of the X gate is called SX. So it belongs to the broader family of the Pauli gates and their roots, providing intermediate states between the identity and the X gate. And there will be like SY, and all of them can be performed using the basis transforms. We will discuss about the S-axis matrix representation later, but let's jump into the SX gate. The diagram looks confusing, but we will mark the diagonal entries, or the straight wires, with teal, and the cross wires or anti-diagonal terms with purple. That's the closest color approximation. So complex numbers have fascinating properties, like rotations is used to implement rotations, that the trigonometry is eventually discovered to be based on complex numbers using the exponential. So use the circuit tool to open the state information to analyze it carefully if you want to understand how the SX gate works. The SX gate produces both a superposition and a flip on the qubit. And this overall result is actually an eigenvector in the Y basis. The blue-green sigil represents the qubit going forward and up, while the blue gold is forward and down. So anything that crosses turns backwards an eighth of a turn. Anything that goes straight will turn forwards an eighth of a turn. Think of an SX gate as also the half, square root of the X gate. So we add another SX. So here's the thing. Blue-green to become green. So blue-green to become green. Then blue-yellow would advance to blue on the straight line, and then it would turn backwards to yellow on the cross. Now a blue-green crossing to the other side would become blue again. Green and yellow would cancel out. Blue and blue would quadruple in size. Okay. Open the state information of the second SX gate with the third rule. Then observe the matrix of the sigils vector. So this is a great opportunity for you to study complex numbers and how they multiply or they add back by connecting them with sigil colors and sizes. And you will see that it's a multiplication of complex numbers that really matter because they implement the rotation. In fact, the exponential along with the imaginaries implement rotation. So these are all the math that all the clutter of text. So you eventually have to learn it, get your hands dirty. Prove now that SX gate are reversible by reversing the circuit back to a sigil of amplitude 1 under the 0 state. So two SX's make an X. It takes 4 to replicate the behavior of an X gate. So of the I gate. So 4 SX's makes an I. These are the tensor information. So these two have a radius of 1 over root 2, so 0.71. So forward, up, forward, down, forward, down. Then multiply this again. So now we apply S on the first column of S. X, so we would end up with the one state and then apply another S, X, SX, and then we have the second column, so forward down, forward up, and finally we have the identity. Okay, we have an H, and then we have an SX, and then we have an, let's try adding an H again. So H, SX, H, so SX is the S in the X spaces. And if you apply an H, sandwich the XX again, you have an equivalent of the S gate. So we have equal superposition. So we end up with 2 blue sigils of size 0.7 each. Then 4 new sigils, which are the square root of Sx, each holding 0.5, and added together to make up the amplitude 1 in the 0 state. Okay. You can also decompose the Sx gate into H's and S's. So it's nothing more than an S gate in the X spaces. So again, the S's, and therefore by extension the Sx, is your first opportunity to obtain a yin-yang. We now explore our last key, the T gate. The T gate is your first non-Clifford gate you will focus on in this game. So even though Clifford gates are powerful, they are not enough for universal quantum computation. Remember the word closure. Remember the word closure. So closure means like any product using these group elements will only yield those within this group elements. It will not yield anything like outside. For example, we have like natural numbers. Natural numbers are closed under addition, but they're not closed under subtraction because we can obtain negatives from these. Likewise, the integers are not closed under division. Otherwise, we could get, because we could get fractional numbers. And then finally, the rational numbers are not closed under power functions because square root of 2 is not rational. Pi is not rational. In fact, it's not even closed under reals because the square root of -1 is the imaginary unit. I, or just could also call this j, that can be used to implement rotations. So we will now jump into the T gate again. So you cannot implement all possible quantum level operations that the unitary set does casually if you just use the 3 polys, the H, the S, and the Cx, the single C gate. So we will introduce you to the square root of x, of S, the T gate. So that's one of the 4th roots of I, and the canonical one, like that. Know that any quantum level logic can be constructed using just a combination of Clifford gates and T, so it's just one gate. So T gate unlocks 1 qubit universal computation, and then we will have the full set. All the gates to realize any sort of calculation physically possible in the universe, nothing beyond your grasp. But regarding the multi qubit cases, we will have to introduce another gate. But it's still going to be a simple idea. This is the T gate. So after mastering the T gate, you will be able to handle all single qubit problems, which will be the topic of our next red electron. All the tools to build quantum algorithms for anything you can imagine. You need something more. What about multiple qubits and entanglement? So open the state information and analyze carefully the complex number it holds for this last quadrant. So this is the tensor for the T gate. So 1, this is called the square root of I. So the off diagonal, the anti-diagonal means your qubit does not flip as it goes through. There's a typo there. It only affects just like the Z and the S, it only affects the quantum phase if it is in the right lane. So observe that it individually turns a solid sigil into a yin-yang. Likewise, two T-gates form an S-gate. And we also notice that the root half plus I root half is the square root of I. And please remember that because it's also computer science and we are using floating point, double precision floating point, that is a computer science specific topic. You will notice that 0.71 is only a rough approximation. In fact, floating point operators cannot even express like a tenth exactly. And eventually you can exploit this to generate and accumulate errors. So here lies the power of the Forgian. So anything that is irrational and complex before transforms into canvas of colors and symbols effortlessly understood. So it's ultimately, when I say universal computation, universal quantum computation, I mean you're able to arbitrarily approximate this to arbitrary accuracy using a finite sequences of these basic gates. So state information, root I against root I becomes I. Okay, how many T-gates do you need to reverse the sigil state back to one root? So remember the T-gate is the square root of the X-gate. So it's directly reversible. Okay, you can shortcut this using Z, S, and T. So you need 8 T-gates. You need 8 T-gates to turn it back into I. So the T-gate is so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The T-gate can be seen as the primitive 8th root of unity, or like a quartic root of -1. Here's the most important aspect of the T-gate. It breaks Clifford. It breaks Clifford, so it allows you to create very complicated or unfamiliar combinations. So 0.71. Think about how much information we can store and retrieve from a single qubit if we have something that breaks Clifford. So HT stores the phrase I am a book. What is it? You can store like an entire text just by using a single real number, which is equivalent to a bit string. You can use a single qubit to store an entire Shakespearean or even an entire catalog of that. What is the Big Bang really? Simple quantum state to stir. But unfortunately, right now the state of the art quantum devices we have right now is still too fragile. 0.711. This is This is something that resembles T gate in the X spaces. Do it again. Now we have quarters, 3/4, unequal. Now you can create more and more unfamiliar numbers. 0.1, then 0.85, 0.5. Do this again. 0.43, 0.53, 0.28. You'll see these unfamiliar gates. We apply an H and a T again. (0.25, 0.53, 7, and 78). So what happens if you just apply HT, 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 HT all over again? This puzzle looks daunting, but it reduces to nothing more than parallelism. So we have HT, HS, HS, H, S, H, S, H. Quantum teleporter. So we now have the swap operator. The swap operator potentially allows you to switch sigils of any two positions if you want. So I will teach you a way to perfectly move quantum states, almost like teleporting them across space. So the swap operator, which allows you to exchange quantum information between qubits, like especially if the qubit system is a tensor, it's unentangled. It can also work if entangled as well, without physically moving or losing any data. You gain the ability to transfer quantum states seamlessly across like individual qubits and groups of entangled qubits between different qubit configurations while preserving their unique properties. So what is the swap gate? So all quantum information is reversible. Quantum information always transforms in our universe, cannot be created or destroyed. Quantum computers are an attempt by conscious beings to isolate part of the universe so we can manipulate information. And under the quantum laws, all information that has ever existed will continue to exist forever, unless it has been affected by noise, so in different forms. And there is an important aspect of quantum computing called the no-cloning theorem. You cannot clone an arbitrary qubit state. Either the host loses information or duplicates created out. So this law is called no-cloning theorem. You can clone like the bases, the eigenstates, like the 0 or the 1 state. So, however, it makes teleportation possible, so assuming that both parties will simply swap positions when done right. We can do this simply using C-axis. So first, we switch the first qubit 2, so that's the ground qubit, to the 1 state. So now we have qubit in the state 0 and the qubit in the state 1. Now, after a swap, we now have a qubit in the state 1 for the first qubit and a qubit in the state 0 in the ground qubit. Let's try the other example. So we flip the first qubit, and the swap operation transfers it to the ground qubit. So 1, 0, 2, 0, 1. now we have like a mystery function, but don't worry, don't worry. One interesting aspect is that it does not affect 0, 0, and 1, 1. So 0, 0, and 1, 1 are one of the two like unity eigenstates of the swap operator. And the word eigen has to deal with bases, which will be the topic for the next lecture. So this mystery gate, which involves an SX and a custom gate, which appears to be an RT. So it splits it into an unentangled system, which the sizes depends on the ground qubit and the phase depends on the first qubit. We apply an swap gate, so as a 3 alternating C-axis in series, and you will see that this has the same effect as swapping the SX and the RT. RT, SX. Okay, now we have the non-eigenstates, so this single row custom gate. So you're given a custom swap gate in one operation. So standard does not fit this configuration. So please add more qubits. So this is a single crisscross on the right. The swap gate allows a crisscross in the middle. This is the swap gate. And then there's like a master gate. So a swap gate is an actual 2-qubit system, but it is actually symmetrical, so it doesn't matter like which order you do them in parallel. Master 1 refers to this gate in slot 1. Slot 1 over there. So each slot is also given its own ID. Here we have a state that begins in 0.25, 0.5, next 0.5, next 0.25. So the first qubit determines whether the gates are flipped in position and in sign, while the ground qubit determines the size. The swap over there, let's put the swap on slot 5, so master 5. Or you can put it on 2 and then it will say master 2. Or let's place the swap on 8 and then we'll see master 8. Now notice that the first qubit determines whether the sigils are switched in position and sign, and now the ground qubit determines whether the size of the sigils. Okay, we now have the measurement problem called the basis transforms. So this will be a medium problem because basis transforms are important when you are performing measurements in different bases or you want to simplify a circuit, because we, in like quantum computing, we treat the z basis as the global coordinate, but you sometimes have to think in local coordinates instead. Qubits' behavior can still be visualized as navigating points on the Bloch sphere, or quantum gates rotate the sphere to reach specific points that correspond to computational states. When the sphere has an infinite point, it's not the same for the Clifford group. We're also constrained to 3 computational bases in quantum computing, which are interrelated in the same manner. We will dig deep into the sphere once we get into Lie groups. Quantum gates manipulate the qubit state, allowing for meaningful computation, such as bit flips, without relying on traditional flip operatings, like the eigenstate. So, how we define or use the computational basis to perform quantum state transformations and understand their role in quantum computation. So let's do the learning. Okay, and you have learned this in the Clifford gate electron. So Seeker, I believe it's the right time to give you a full understanding of how we define the qubit, and everything you need to know about basis transforms, how quantum hardware makers decided to represent information on qubits. Well, that's the stage of reasons, which is one of the stages after the stage of axioms. The most common way of thinking about a qubit is to imagine a sphere. Quantum Odyssey visualizes qubits as a sequence of sigils. And we know that spheres have uncountable points on its circumference. And ideally we would have a noise-free quantum computing, allowing us to store unlimited information in a single qubit. But the noise will destroy that. It will not be physically possible anytime soon. So, you can just cool a quantum computer to absolute zero, which you cannot do this exactly. So, we have to decide on a computational basis. And the global computational basis is called the Z basis. We will have to pick the furthest points of the sphere to be your units of information. This is the idea of the Bloch sphere. Measurement noise. Quantum hardware builders just decide to use the 3 bases that are mutually orthogonal. The basis names are based on the eigenstates of the corresponding gate. So we have the Z gate. The Z gate is a diagonal gate. Its computational basis. So let's use our sidebar. So Z is equivalent to 1 and -1. And then we have Z of 1 is equal to Z of the 0 state is equal to the 0 state. So that means eigen is the positive eigenvector. The 1 state can also be technically called the negative eigenvector. Interesting enough, positive and negative switch together. Negative 1 state. Lambda would be equal to -1. Okay. Now place a Z gate and observe that it does not affect the sigil. The qubit remains in the 0 state because it's an eigenstate of eigenvalue plus 1. We add an H now. To move on to the next topic. Now we are in the X basis. So what does the X basis even mean? blackboard. Okay. So sorry if I'm looking to the right because my blackboard is on another screen. The x basis is defined like this: 1 and 1. Then we have the plus is equivalent to square root of 1, 1. Then the minus is defined as square root of 1 minus 1. We now perform switches. X of plus, notice it leaves it unaffected. So we say it's eigenstate of 1. Likewise, we have x of minus. Notice now we have root 2. We have. Now the two things are different. Negative 1 and 1. So they're switched together. Switched together in place. So okay. So here we have the x gate. So the x does nothing to the plus state. We apply a z to turn negative state. The neg state. We apply another x to turn it into neg, which is when you flip the two sigil signs. Okay, now we want to form a quantum interference with the z gate. So we now have the neg state. The h, which is its own inverse, converts this back into the z state. Name this case the negative eigenvalue in the z state. The negative eigenvector is just another word to say the one state. Output is the same, the method differs. You will have to use other quantum gates. So when computing on quantum hardware, it's important to use as few gates as possible, because the gates have an intrinsic amount of noise. It's not a perfect world. Just like you have to pay a small fee for 4x, which is annoying. It's annoying as hell. The forge does not account for noise. This is a simulation game. All the quantum algorithms you build as if they're noise-free up to the floating point error. In quantum hardware, it's much more than the floating point error. So efficiency is important, especially if it's done in series. We reverse the applied x gate, but we're not allowed to use x. We have to use the z gate. So it's x in terms of z, you just have to sandwich it with h. Because h acts as a change of basis, as well as a splitter joiner. The least common of the three bases is called the y basis. This system, this one qubit system over there is called the I state, or the right state. So we set up the board. So we have this right state or I state. Let's write this in group. So y is equivalent to a combination of an x and a z. I don't know how this thing got lagged. But the Y gate is the least commonly used of the gates, so we will introduce you to the basis for now. So here, because this is a relatively tricky topic, I have to admit. So here we have the basis states. So we know that here the Z basis is the global coordinate system. Basis transforms allow us to use local coordinates. For example, we have 0 is equivalent to 1, 0 as a vector. We have 1 is equivalent to 0, 1. And notice that we apply a Z. So Z of 0 is equal to 1, 0 is equal to the 0 state. Z of 1 is equal to 0, negative 1. It is equal to the negative 1 state. Z has a matrix representation of 1 and negative 1. It is diagonal. So 0 is equal to the positive eigenvalue in the Z basis, while 1 is equal to the negative eigenvalue in the Z basis. We now examine the other bases, so other eigenvectors. So we have plus. Plus is equivalent to 1, 1. Minus is equivalent to 1 minus 1. We apply an eigenstate, so the eigenstate is the bit flip. So the left and the right lanes change position, but because the left and the right lanes are indistinguishable in the plus state, we have x plus is equivalent to 1, 1 again, which is equal to plus, yet x of minus is equivalent to 1 over root 2 minus plus. So notice it's plus 1 because minus 1, minus 1, minus again becomes plus 1. and it becomes negative. So the minus state is like the on state in the x basis, while the plus state is the +1 in the x basis. The H gate converts between any gate in the z basis to the x basis. So we have H of 0 becomes H of 0 becomes plus. Then we have H of 1 becomes minus. Likewise, we have H of plus converts it back to 0, and H of minus converts it into 1. We have this. H is the change of basis matrix between the z and x basis. That 0 is actually also equal to root half of plus plus root half of minus through this identity. So 0 plus 1 plus 0 minus 1 after two square roots together. And likewise, we have 1 is square root of plus minus 1 over square root of minus. So the expansion we have 0 plus 1 minus 0 minus 1. In which we see the zeros cancel out and the ones join them together. This implies that we have a matrix representation of H. So it's going to be half of 1, 1, 1, negative 1. So it doesn't make sense now that H looks like a half of x and a half of z. Half of z and half of x. The case for the Y gate is trickier. So the Y gate, we have the left state and the right state. The right state is the positive eigenvector. The right state is 1 and I. That means the on slot, or the negative eigenvector slot, is advanced quarter turn. We apply a y after, so we have on both. The left state is similarly defined, except that the one's position is now negative I. We apply a y gate, so y gate is this. Those which return to zero state would have their phase go back by a quarter turn. Those which advance to the 1 slot would have their phase advance by half a turn. So we have y of right would be this. 1 becomes I. And I goes back to 1. So and it is the positive eigenvalue as a positive eigenvalue, so it's the positive eigenvector. So likewise, we apply a y on the left state. So here, 1 will be advanced to I. Then negative I will turn back to negative 1. Notice that the minus sign switch position. So we have minus left. And that would be the negative eigenvalue for the y basis. Okay, then how can you convert an z basis to a y basis? So the process there is more complicated. So we have to express z in terms of x, then in terms of s. So we have this. So let's try applying an s on a plus. So s plus is equal to the right state. So s plus would mean s of 1, 1, and it would mean 1 and I. Now let's apply an s on the minus state. S, then 1 minus 1 equals 1 minus I. Okay, so what does that mean? Okay, in this case, we would have the right state for the 1 and I, and the left state for 1 and neg I. Therefore, we can conclude that the change of basis from z to y is equal to the change of basis from z to x or better, more professionally, let's say this. The basis vector from like y from z is equal to the basis vector from x from z and the basis vector y from x. So the basis vector for y from x is equal to the s-gate. The basis vector of x from z is equal to the h-gate. So this plus over there already implies h 0, sh0. Likewise, we have the inverse of the basis. So b of zy is equal to the basis of zx basis of xy, which is going to be h s dagger. Now we'll identify the change of basis formulation. So sh is 1I root 111 negative 1. Okay, we move the
I can't connect to the Wi-Fi network. You might want to check the connection
and
settings
then notice
Google
that
Map.
the I on the bottom suggests that everything on the lower row would be advanced quarter term. 1I minus I. Likewise, we have h s dagger, which is nothing more than its conjugate transpose. So 1, so I minus I 1. Finally, we express the left gate, the z gate in terms of the y gate. So we have 0. 0 is equal to 0 plus 1 so plus 1 okay. So 1 and I plus, and we need to cancel out this I over there, plus then 1 over neg I. All halved, so while the one state is defined similarly, it's going to be 1I, no, 0I, 1I minus then 1 minus I. But now this is where the tricky part comes into place. We need to advance this thing by negative I. So we have I then negative 1, so I 1 I minus I 1 negative I. These two cancel out. Now we have 0 and -1 plus (0, -1). Actually, it's more accurate to say it this way. And you will see the structure of these things show up. We move back to the x to see for comparison. So we have plus minus over there, plus plus over there. So, and notice that it's the h is its own complex conjugate, and then we have the h's as well. This is an idea of the change of basis. So there is a map of the change of basis before we move on. So we have this z basis, x basis, and y basis. H, then we have x to y is S, y to x is S, dagger. So this is the map. We also have this observation that Sx, so root x, is equal to the x to s in the x basis. So it's going to be s except with the change of basis. So h. So it's also going to be this S, so basis from Z from X, so basis, so we have some, we want to, let's say this is, whole thing is in the X basis. Turn it into Z, so we center it, and then we revert. This is the idea of the basis transform, so just to express the increased difficulty of this puzzle. So sorry if I have taken longer to handle. 14 people watching now, wow. My videos are exploding. Videos are exploding now. So we now have an idea on how the basis transform works. we have the right state. So HS converts the 0 state into the right state. Okay, now we have the Y. So we have B of Y from Z, and then we want to, and that Y over there would serve as the switch for the Y gate. Anything in the Y gate, the output will remain the same. Let's try adding as much as Y gates as possible. Now we have to produce an equivalent Y state. So how can you do that? So notice that the S would serve as the equivalent of the flip in of that. So the S is the square root of the Z gate in this case. But now we could add 2 S gates or Z gate to flip it to the negative eigenvalue in the Y basis. So we add Z. So now the Z would be there to flip the qubit in the Y state. Now here's another exercise. You have you have to implement an X, but only in the Y basis. So that means you can only use H's and S's. So HS to convert this into the Y basis. Now we add an S again. This S performs the flip. So we have a yin yang, so nope. So HS, then S dagger. S dagger, but we don't have the S dagger, so it's the same as like adding another Z to it. So blue and green define 0, blue and gold define the 1. So I plus and I minus. That's the other name for the right and the left respectively. So if you think of a qubit as a sphere and the fact that we don't have noiseless quantum computation, this is a way to go through all the states in just the 3 computational bases over there. So we have gates, trivial, computational, basis transforms. So Z basis, X basis, and then the Y basis. Okay, we can now create a Z gate without using a Z gate. So the name of this is Z without Z. So we have an X, then we have a Z. So how to do that? First, we convert this to the X basis. Now, in the X basis, the X serves as Z. The X flips this negative eigenvector. And then the H converts the negative vector back into the Z form. Okay, we will now use diagonalization. So diagonalization basically means to treat it as if it were a straight. So we need to understand how to use the H-gate besides superposition. The efficient tool is called diagonalization. So notice that when blue and red collide with green and gold, colors mix. They may be destroyed or may added. So we diagonalize. We can just, for this puzzle, we can just cancel out the H-gate by adding another H-gate. Now we just have an S-gate. The operation here is called a P-gate, and it's not so straightforward to undo if you do not know how to sandwich it with an H-gate. So here, you can try to try to find an inverse of this without sandwiching. So reverse a P-gate. This is just an S-gate. The SX, that's just nothing more than SX. So, okay, here we are working in the Y basis, and what does the H do? H, SH. Just brute force this thing out. We have a long way. Okay, you have found the inverse of the P-gate, so do you see like what it diagonalizes to get the sigil out? So diagonalizes to get this color of the sigil out. So we want yellow. So let's say it diagonalizes. Okay, this thing diagonalizes the Z, so Z would be, so we want to just extract the color, so it's diagonal, yes. So it's an outer and diagonal and outer. Now let's see, like we have two qubits gates, and then we have CX. We apply an H gate diagonalized on X. So what happens if we try the same thing on a controlled X? So we sandwich the X's on both sides. Let's control that. Control the H's as well. We get a Z. Control Z is only diagonal, so that means the Y representation is two straight lines. We can turn it into controlled X just by using diagonalization. So we sandwich the Z with H. That means we express X as something in terms of a diagonal matrix and the outer matrices, or diagonal operators. So so H gate diagonalized on X. So what does that mean? Okay, so we're basically expressing a Z in terms of X. Now we have the swap operator. The operator that switches cubic states without moving them. So let's say what happens if we replace the middle control x with a special diagonal form. So we're not allowed to give an x. We have to express this in terms of z. So here we have HZH, and only the Z needs to be controlled. All quantum gates, no matter how complicated, can be broken down to applying 3 consecutive steps to a quantum state. The first and the third steps are called the outer steps, the part that diagonalizes the operators. So it turns states into other states by combining, moving, or splitting the sigils. Then the diagonal operator, which is the eigen operator, which performs the eigen multiplication on the state that has been diagonalized, and the final part that undoes the diagonalization. So the answer for this would be you're performing a swap. We perform a control x on the with the ground cubitus as the control, and then once again on the first qubit. Okay, we have completed the main branch for this. We have completed the main branch up to like ring 3, so we will express how to extract the we'll extract the color, so that's the thing we need. So HPH. So HPH. Can you find what it diagonalizes to get the color of the sigil out? So it diagonalizes Z. So it just changes the color of the sigils without affecting the amplitudes. So just changes the colors across. So this state over there, this is the right state. This is the left state. It's the left state because the right lane is 90 degrees clockwise. We'll perform a Z on that. Now we have the right state turned into the left state turned into a right state. So first quadrant, second quadrant. We consider the inverse of the P gate. The P gate would be, so I don't even know what is a P gate, but there's a sandwich with a P gate. But we know to undo that, we can just use H. I'm not sure if there is a, if some of them, these designs have shortcuts. Okay, so We are done with the main portion of the second and the third ring. So it's the path that follows directly from the Y-gate electron. We will focus on the branching path for the remainder of the Juneteenth. So once again, if you enjoyed the channel, subscribe and like just as how YouTube likes to give you a thumbs up, and subscribe clicks the bell icon. It even gives you an indicator for that. And once again, happy Juneteenth. And I will be back again, actually. So, once again, see me again at, again, 7:06, so 19 p.m. today. It's a doubleheader.